Hi everybody, good afternoon to our listeners in Europe, good morning to listeners in the Americas, and good evening to anybody in Asia or the Middle East. My name is Martin Cowan. I'm contributing editor for T News and moderator of today's webinar. The subject, as I'm sure you know, is Meet the Connected Traveller. Tips to become a successful online travel seller. A couple of housekeeping points before we begin. There's going to be a couple of polls in a few moments that we'd just like you to fill in just to get an idea of who you are, where you are, and also, most importantly, on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a little box on the GoToWebinar button that is called Questions. So if there's any questions you'd like to ask at any stage during the webinar, please feel free to key your questions into that box, and at the end of the presentations, I'll do everything I can to ask as many questions of our panelists as the time allows. Okay, next slide, Jean. So there I am on the right, and on the left we've got Jean Quinn, who's co-founder of T News and producer of the webinar. He's on duty in the background to make sure everything goes smoothly. So Jean, next slide please. Okay everybody, this is the poll, fairly straightforward. Where are you located? The screen should come up now. Okay. Okay, so there's the answer. So we've got just over half of you in EMEA, a third of you in North America, and 1 in 10 of you from Latin America and Asia Pacific. Thanks very much for making the effort to join. Okay, next question, please. Okay, again, fairly straightforward. Which travel business segment do you represent? Options are there now. Okay, answers coming up. Okay, so again, it's a really nice mix we've got here. We've got a third of you from travel agencies, TMCs or corporate buyers, slightly more of you are technology providers, and then there's some OTA suppliers and our friends other also in attendance. So yeah, a good mix of geographies, a good mix of business segments. Next slide, please, Jean. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to hand you over to the presenters who will introduce themselves and give you an idea of where we're going to go with this webinar. So over to you, Madhavan.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Martin. Jean, if you could move to the next slide. My name is Madhavan Kasturi. Thank you all for joining this webinar. A brief introduction about myself. I joined Sabre 2 years back. I am the Director of Online Technology for EMEA. What that role means is that I champion the needs of online travel agencies, OTAs in EMEA in terms of their product requirements, and I feed that back into Sabre's product development programs. And I also lead a team of experts who help EMEA OTAs adopt and embrace Sabre technology. I also have Andy Owen-Jones with me today. Thank you very much, Andy, for joining us. Andy is the co-founder and CEO of BD4 Travel, and it's a pleasure to co-host this session with Andy. Now, in terms of what we are going to cover today, in the next 40 minutes or so, Andy and we both are going to take 20 minutes each. In the first 20 minutes, I will talk about 3 topics essentially. I will talk about a major trend that we are seeing around us first, and then I will introduce the connected traveler, and I will also share some top tips that we think are very relevant in this day and age. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So before jumping into the content of this slide, let me invite you all to just imagine a little bit. If you could close your eyes and imagine the last time you went out shopping for a pair of jeans. It is not necessarily a very easy process. We might not realize it because this is just a fundamental item that we all buy. But at least for me, when I go out shopping for jeans, if I go to the high street store, especially if I'm going shopping after a peak shopping period, and when I'm looking for jeans, most often the stores are not arranged very well. There's been a lot of traffic. The jeans in the shelves are a bit disorganized. And if I'm looking for my specific size and color, let us say I find the color that I like, I find a waist size that suits me, it might be a bit of a struggle to find the correct length or the correct fitting. And it is not easy to browse through the shelves in most brick and mortar shops to find exactly what you're looking for. Those of you who shop for jeans online, the process is necessarily not easy there either. You can get the size, shape, and fitting that you want, but unless you tried out something like a pair of jeans, you really don't want to make the buying decision. And here is where I think we wanted to introduce the first example. There is a retail startup called Hointer. This is a startup born out in Seattle, USA. They have solved this problem in a fantastic way, we think. If you go to the Hointer store, they don't have racks and shelves of jeans arranged out there. They just have a few mannequins. The jeans are actually already decked up on these mannequins. They also sell other fashion apparel, as you can see in that image there. And you typically walk into the shop with your mobile device, and you would have the Hointer app installed, and you just scan the barcode of the pair of trousers that you like, and within the app you can browse and select the exact size, waist size, length, color, fitting, whatever you want, and you can try that pair of jeans in your own avatar on the app itself and see how you look in the app. And if you're happy with that, you can ask for a trial, and by the time you walk into the trial room in the store, the jeans trousers automatically comes up in a chute and it is ready waiting for you in the trial room. You just try it out. If you like it, you buy it. If you don't like it, you drop it back the same chute. Essentially a very, very different shopping experience. The shopper to scan through shelves. It is a very, very smooth digitized shopping experience in a brick and mortar store. And as a byproduct, Hointer has also solved a fundamental operational problem. They don't have too many staff having to run around the store arranging jeans after customers have tried them out. It is a very simple, invisible back office process that happens with a much smaller set of staff in the store. So that's an excellent disruptive model to change the way people shop. We wanted to share another example on the slide, which is an example from Amazon. We all know Amazon, and all of us probably know very well that a decade ago, when Amazon changed the game of e-commerce and they changed the game of how we buy books, they put out a lot of brick and mortar bookshops out of business. Right? They transformed the whole experience of buying books to a complete online experience. But look at that. This is an image from today. In certain specific cities in the US, Amazon actually has brick and mortar shops open. So that is the picture you're seeing there. And in these brick and mortar shops, Amazon gives its customers an opportunity to touch and feel Amazon, and they also use this opportunity to cross-sell other Amazon products like their Kindle electronic devices or Amazon Prime subscriptions. And they also use the location to drop off to allow customers to pick up purchases that they made online. What's fundamentally happening here? What can we see from these two examples? We think what is happening is fundamentally a blurring of the lines between the digital world and the brick and mortar world. In other words, online and offline worlds are blurring and kind of amalgamating together. So that is a big key trend that we are observing. Now, before moving on to the next slide, I wanted to pass it back on to Martin to run a quick that we wanted to take at this point in time.
Okay, thanks, Madhavan. So here's another poll question for you.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry to interrupt. So the question should be on screen in front of you now. Again, fairly straightforward, which is a good thing. For long-haul vacations, how many travel websites and apps do you use before booking? The options should come up shortly. I know there's been a lot of research done around this. Google, I think they say it's 37. I can't remember what TripAdvisor says, so it'll be interesting to see what our audience's take on this is. Okay, that's quite interesting. I think that's lower than most of the other research that I just mentioned, maybe because we're all in the travel business. We know better than the average consumer which sites we want to go to. But yeah, you know, nearly 4 out of 5 of us use between 1 and 10 websites, and then the balance up to 20. Very few of us go above 20, which is interesting. Madhavan, does that come as a bit of a surprise, or is it just me? I think that's quite a low number of sites, but then having said that, it's because maybe we're in the business, we know it better than the general consumer.
You're right, Martin. It does come as a bit of a surprise, and the research we have done showed different numbers, and we'll go into that. And the reason you're citing for this result is probably quite true. If we move on to the next slide with that piece of information in the background. So we spoke about the blurring of the lines between the digital and brick-and-mortar world. Now let us have a look at how does this influence the traveler. Now, about 8 weeks ago, we published a white paper called Meet the Connected Traveler. Some of you might have had the chance to have a look at it. If not, I encourage you to please to have a look at that paper. What we have done here is we've tried to personify and give an identity to the connected traveler. So we've called him Michael. He's 39 years old, married with no kids. He lives in London, works in Canary Wharf in London as a financial controller, and he has a healthy disposable income to spend on travel. Now, Michael has decided to go on a holiday to the Maldives for 2 weeks. Let us have a quick look at how he goes about booking his holiday travel. Next slide, please. So it is fair to say that the first thing he will do is go to Yahoo or Bing to search about the Maldives. No, I'm actually kidding. He does not go to Yahoo or Bing. I think it is safe to say that there is a 99% chance that Michael goes to Google. Most of us do. And he searches for information about Maldives. What we've done here really is just laid out a simple scenario, and I'll walk you through that. Starting with this Google search, he's basically going to be looking for information to form his opinion about when is the best time to travel to the Maldives. And then what we've seen is he typically gets into what we are calling a fairly intensive rabbit hole. We're going to call it as the online rabbit hole, because he is looking for inspiration. So he visits a lot of blogs. He uses Instagram and Pinterest to look for inspiration and images about Maldives. He watches a series of YouTube videos about Maldives. And by this time, he's gathered a lot of information through his Google search and through his online rabbit hole experience. And he starts feeling a bit overwhelmed. And this is the time we think he feels this strong need to converge. And this is when he calls his friendly travel agent. He requests her to send across some interesting offers related to Maldives. And he sleeps on it for some time. And over the course of time, he also checks out the Lonely Planet guide on Amazon about Maldives. And he also wants to understand what other people's experiences have been. So he obviously talks to his friends, his colleagues at work. He reaches out to his fans on Facebook and Twitter to gather their experience. And finally, with a lot of information to hand, he decides to go to his travel agent and actually look for a really good deal or offer a package to go to the Maldives. And along this way, he is browsing on his mobile phone, he's checking out meta search sites, like he visits his favorite online travel agencies, and he's basically trying to gather some more information and intelligence on the kind of negotiation he can do with his travel agent. And I think a lot of you might associate with this kind of experience, right? So these are just 8 things that Michael might do. Most of us might do more. Some of us might do less. And this has nothing to do with Michael's demographic. Has nothing to do with his age necessarily. I think even if I had to think of my mother who lives in Bangalore, who's close to 70 years old, I'm sure she will do her fair bit of Googling and searching online before she makes a decision to travel anywhere. Now the question is, where does Michael finally make his booking? Well, let us leave that open for now. I think it is fair to say that he will give his business to the travel supplier that offers him the best combination of trust, choice, inspiration, and price. Next slide, please. Let us also look at Michael's online, well, not online necessarily, right? This is a mixture of online and offline behavior. It is really his shopping behavior. Let us look at it from a different dimension. If you want to summarize and collect some statistics on what Michael did, he has spent 3.5 months between his intention of going to the Maldives and actually making the booking. He's combined a range of resources, both online and offline, to arrive at that decision. And he's used multiple devices. We have an example of 4 devices there. We probably should have added the smart TV as well. And he is getting access to information through all these different devices at a time of his choice and convenience. And based on the research that we have done, on average, the connected traveler visits about 47 different travel websites and uses at least about 8 or 9 different travel apps before he converges on a decision. Quite different from the poll result that we had now, but this is the statistic that we are observing certainly in this space. If we move on to the next slide. So Martin, let me hand over to you for the second poll question that we have.
Yeah, okay, everybody. Here's the 4th poll question, and we've got a few questions coming through from the audience that sort of relate to this. So the question is, what is the most important reason you would book travel in an offline environment? So we're asking, why would you book travel in an offline environment? And there's a few options coming up. I mean, one question maybe for later, Madhavan, is whether there's any research or evidence around the number of people booking offline who have also had a look online. So we're trying to work out whether this is, qualitative or quantitative research. But that's a question for the end. I just thought I'd mention it now while I remember. Yes. So the answers for this should be coming up shortly. Okay, let me look at that. Oh, it's slightly varied. So good news for the agent community. 1 in 3 would book offline because of the expertise. And what's that, 28%? So it's just over 1 in 4 think that offline travel agents tick the boxes on personalized service, expertise, information, and easier to book. Interesting that only 3% think that offline agents have more reliable information. And only 6% think it's an easier booking process. So it looks as if the reason people book offline is the personalized service and the expertise, and certainly the personalized service is something I know we will be talking about later. So yeah, back to you, Madhavan.
Yes, thanks, Martin. And I think this result certainly correlates very well with our research and findings as well. If we move on to the next slide, what we wanted to do was answer 2 fundamental questions about Michael. Why does Michael dedicate so much time to planning this trip and use so many resources? First question. And with all this multitude of touch points, how can travel businesses win Michael's business and get him as a customer? Now the answer to the first question is we think these resources, be it online or offline, have their own distinct benefits. Let's look at online first. The thing with online is it offers consumers a high degree of flexibility and opportunity for self-service, and there is an element of comfort for Michael to be in his own space without feeling any pressure of any kind, to just browse and look at offers and decide when he wants to in terms of buying. So I think that is a key part of the flexibility and comfort that online offers. There is also access to full content online, and by this we mean content not only in terms of the travel option to reach a particular destination, but a wider range of content in terms of accommodation, in terms of things that Michael can do in the Maldives, in terms of restaurants that he can visit. He has access to a wide range of content, and he can configure a package for himself. He also gets real-time pricing. He doesn't have to ask an agent for a quote and wait for a long time to get a sense of price. He can find his price anchor points fairly quickly online and get a sense of whether his travel package is going to be affordable to him or not very, very quickly. And last but not the least is the audio-visual inspiration that online offers, especially in the smart world that we all live in with the multitude of smart devices we have. I think it is more and more easy for us, just because there is availability of that content, to access audio-visual content for inspiration. So these, we think, are some of the key benefits of online, which Michael wants to capitalize on, which is why he's behaving the way he is. If you look at the offline behavior, going back to what we saw in our brief poll previously, I think the top two items that drive offline shopping for Michael are personal service, the human interaction element, and the expert advice and trust that goes along with it. And the offline booking process, one could argue, is also a bit easier. You walk into a shop, you come out with a booking, but maybe that's a bit arguable. But I guess the last point is important. If something goes wrong, Michael has a sense of comfort that there is someone to turn to for fixing it, for fixing the problem. And it kind of builds into the trust he has as well. So these are some of the advantages of offline. Now, how can a travel business win Michael's custom? We think the best approach is to try and follow what Pointer and Amazon are doing. Combine the best of both worlds and unite the benefits of online and offline. And the key thing for travel companies to do is to put themselves in a position as a trusted advisor for Michael. They also need to be present in moments that matter, and we'll talk about that with some examples in the subsequent slides. But being present in the moments that matter for Michael is key. And also, travel businesses need to have a very strong, obvious value proposition in the connected world that Michael can see and feel. And in the subsequent slides, I'll just talk about some examples, 4 examples really, of how we think you can achieve this. Obviously, the opportunities are endless. We're just going to be focusing on 4. If we move to the next slide, please. Yes, so the first tip we wanted to share with you was meet your customers where they want to be met. Research has shown us that on a smartphone, 50% of the time is spent on a single top app, and more than 75% of the time is spent on the top 3 apps. In other words, most users spend less than 25% of the time on most of the other apps that they have in their handheld device. In the majority of cases, what we are seeing is that the top app is a messaging app like WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger, both of which have about 1 billion active users. So it's probably fair to say that for Michael, his handheld device, his smart device, and the messaging apps there are the place where he'd probably like to be met. And there are 2 examples here. The one on the left is called Taylor. This is a personal digital agent prototype developed by Sabre Labs, which is our in-house innovation laboratory. So Taylor watches your calendar. It sees if you have put an event in your calendar that is out of town. And if you've done that, it will automatically search for a hotel for that event. It will transmit that information to IBM Watson and perform a trade-off analysis taking into account price, location, star rating, and it will make a simple single hotel recommendation. So if Michael is doing that, it will make a recommendation to Michael. Now Michael will have the choice to specify a different hotel brand or to specify a different star rating of the hotel that he prefers. And Taylor will remember that. And as and when Michael uses Taylor more and more, the application will remember his preferences, and with time, Taylor will be able to bring back personalized recommendations to Michael. So that is one example. On the right-hand side there, we have another example of a German startup called Travel Homie. They operate through instant messaging. They provide a very fast, easy, and reliable way for their customers to receive personalized travel recommendations straight on their phones. Now, behind the scenes, their system is powered by real humans. They have also a self-learning engine, which they are investing and building further. And for all travel-related questions, customers of Travel Homie can message this particular application in natural human language and ask for information, ask for personalized recommendations, and receive that. Now, these two are specific examples. We just want to give you a flavor. You might want to think about how, in the context of your business, you would like to reach out to your customers through the messaging channel on their smart devices. If we move on to the next slide, we also want to share some examples of how certain travel companies are actually doing what Pointer and Amazon are doing, travel agencies to be more specific. So on the left, you're seeing Thomas Cook's flagship store, and this store looks nothing like a traditional brick-and-mortar travel agency store. It looks more like an Apple store with monitors, and it has widescreen displays on the wall. It has iPads for browsing. So within the store, a potential customer can get a fairly isolated online sort of experience where they have their own personal space around them. They can browse and look for offers, and when they are ready to talk to a human agent, they can always reach out to one and speak to them. On the right is another example of one of my favorite travel agencies up in the Nordics. This is a Danish agency called Kilroy. Now, they have a very focused customer segment. They focus on youngsters and students, and if you go to their shops, it looks nothing like a travel agency. It looks more like a college campus. They have these beautiful spaces where students can come together, and the students can actually reach out to other students who are probably in different parts of the world. So a group of students in Denmark can reach out to their friends in, say, Cape Town, and they can together over video conference plan a holiday or plan their gap year in Australia. And Kilroy provides the environment for that, and they also provide experts who can actually coach and guide these students on their long distance travel journeys. So a very different way of changing the experience for the shopper. So the second tip really is offer a seamless online and offline experience, something to consider. If we move on to the next slide. The third tip we want to really emphasize on is focusing on inspiration through audio-visual content. And we wanted to get a bit specific on this topic. We really want to focus a bit more on the very rapidly emerging virtual reality, VR technology. One of the striking examples recently, at least for us, is what Marriott did. Marriott, the hotel chain, they created a prototype called Teleporters, which integrates Oculus Rift VR technology and also other sensory experiences like artificial sun and wind to create what they call as the 4D experience. So travelers can take a 3-minute trip to Maldives. So Michael can take a 3-minute trip to Maldives using this Oculus Rift device and actually get a feel for his vacation or holiday before actually getting there and booking. Now, it is fair to say that today this technology might be a bit more on the expensive side, but we think there are cheaper options coming out really fast. On the right-hand side there, you can see a picture of Google Cardboard. People VR virtual reality viewer that works just with your smartphone and a variety of different apps. It sells for less than $30. So this is something that is still, I think, viable for most businesses. And I think we are also seeing a very big trend where the big players in the consumer technology sector, companies like Apple, Samsung, Microsoft, and in some sense Google and Facebook are also investing hugely in VR technology. So we think that this space is going to grow really, really fast, and I think it is fair to say that this is an area which travel businesses should watch out for. We move on to the next one. The fourth tip, I kind of want to wrap up with this. The next slide, yeah. So I want to wrap up with this one, the fourth tip, which I think is key. The ability to interpret data and recognize patterns and be able to react instantaneously. And when I go out there and meet my customers, or if I'm going to a travel event like say ATM or WTM, most of the time, most common question that I get asked is what kind of skills and expertise should travel businesses build in-house? And my answer to that in simple terms is you need to have in-house data analysts or data scientists. Maybe scientists is a very big term, but definitely people who are very, very good at interpreting data and interpreting patterns, and people who can inform the decision-making process. And coupled with that, as an organization, you need to have the agility to react very, very fast to changes that you're observing. So I think that is definitely an area where travel businesses should focus on in terms of building in-house talent. With that, I'd like to wrap up this part of the webinar and hand over to my friend, Andy Owen-Jones. Andy, over to you.
Thank you, Madhavan. And that last point is particularly pertinent for me. Interpret data, recognize patterns, and react instantaneously, because that's what my business, BD for Travel, does for our clients. So we aim to use data to understand what a client wants and then instantly change the site or channel to meet their needs more effectively. And we've been a Sabre partner for a couple of years, and more importantly for today, I think we share a vision of where the market's going and what tools a travel agent may need to succeed. I co-founded BD for Travel 4 years ago after seeing how hard it was for online actors to know what their clients want and also to really understand what was happening as their clients interacted with the site. So a few minutes ago, Madhavan mentioned that using audio-visual content to inspire people is really important, but my experience is many of our clients don't even know how many pictures are being shown when they show a picture to a client of a hotel. Is it actually being shown, or is the picture broken? 29% of the people in the poll said they wanted a personalized experience from an offline travel agency, and they don't feel they get such a personalized experience from an online agency, and perhaps that's why people look at somewhere like 37 or 47 different sites, because that's not a good thing. We're not somehow succeeding in keeping people on our site as travel sellers, and the only people who benefit from this are the search engine providers who take a little Google tax every time someone clicks from one to the other. Often we see that sites are not constructed to reflect the needs of clients. Next slide, please. And that's because people are different. Michael, for example, may be looking for a holiday in the Maldives this time, but maybe on his next time he's planning to ski with his friends. And he might have a totally different set of desires, maybe a different price point or different expectations. And I would say, in short, it's too simplistic to think of people as averages or even segments or personas, which can be very misleading in travel. I might fit in one segment one day and be in a completely different segment. So if you build a hypothesis around what I want, you're very likely to be wrong. But I'm going to take a step back before we look at how to address individuals, and I want to focus on 3 areas. Next slide, please. A quick look at strategy for going online, a look at the implications of your business model choice, and then really focusing on how not to be average in what you do. And the overall takeaway that I want to leave you with is, how can you focus and pitch yourself so that you don't disappear into a sea of mediocrity? Because maybe the reason people go to 37 different sites is they're all too similar, and there's no real focus in individual sites to keep people on there and keep them moving in the same direction with you. So let's start with strategy. Next slide, please. Those of you who studied business in the 80s or 90s can't have escaped Michael Porter and his strategic frameworks. And I feel that in today's hyper-growth environment, much of this emphasis on strategy seems to have disappeared, but I think the basic competitive frameworks haven't really altered. Porter suggested there were three basic ways to compete. You could be the lowest cost provider, you could differentiate, or you could focus on a particular niche where you were either differentiated or you had a better access to people and could be the lowest cost provider. And if you didn't achieve one of those things, you would be stuck in the middle. And I would very much suggest the reason people jump from site to site is because they're very similar to each other. It's very hard, though, for a new player to be the lowest cost provider. It's tricky because you've got to have a lot of investment or a particular advantage, and you may achieve this, but it's hard to be a lower cost provider than someone who has enormous scale. And the largest players out there, or as particular emphasis on providers, they have access to content that no one else does. It's also very difficult to differentiate across the board, at least in the short term. Generally, we find that the companies who get a return on their e-commerce investment adopt a focus, whether that's a geographic and client focus or being really, really good at delivering a particular type of product or an experience. They tend to build on their existing competence and use online to develop that, rather than picking the elements they like from many different websites and trying to build a generic travel e-commerce site. That, to me, is the definition of being stuck in the middle. Most of the ones we've seen doing that, who take the search box from somewhere, the calendar from somewhere else, the product from somewhere else, and so on, have no particular reason to attract anyone. I think successful online migration starts by understanding what sets you apart, and then building the online capabilities to reinforce that, not by trying to be all things to all people. Next slide, please. When it comes to the business model, there's a basic question to answer. Are you the agent of the provider, the hotels, the airline and package builders, or are you the agent of the client, or the agent of Michael, if you like? In the old world, the agent worked for the providers. As the world moves towards retail, the job of the agent is more than ever to understand in depth what the customer needs and respond to them. Yet that's very hard when your clients are anonymous. It's very easy to think of the client as clicks, bookings, or segments. We have a picture here of Michael. One of our clients actually puts a large cardboard cutout of a person in their room, and they call him Martin, in order to remind them that they're dealing with people. And that's often the problem. The way we measure people who come online and the way they perform, we think of them as segments, at best as personas. We don't think of them as individuals. Next slide, please. And that's really important because people and systems don't act in neat, simple ways. The theory of a sales funnel is that people will search for inspiration, move into planning based on deals, and slip down neatly into a booking process. And what Madhavan showed for diagrammatic purposes was a nice, clean sales funnel for Michael earlier in the presentation, even if it had many different stages in the process. But it's really very rarely like that. In practice, travel packages, for example, can only often be fully priced when someone pieces the whole thing together. So we see people going right through the booking path to the booking page and doing availability checks to see what the final price is, even when they're still in the inspiration phase. Their path through the web and through an individual site is messy and complex. And part of what one needs to understand in this is, why do people buy? What is your buying thesis? Do you understand at what point people buy? And we devote a lot of time to really try and understand why some people buy and some people don't. At what point do they make their buying choices? Because we tend to define our sites in a funnel-like way, whereas people purchase in a much messier fashion. So our buying thesis is that people really start their decision process when they compare products. They might search terms like luxury holiday in the Maldives. Maybe that's what Michael put first in the search box in Google. But it's only when they start to compare products that they're able to make a good decision. It's like when you go into a store to buy food and are confronted with loads and loads of ingredients to buy dinner. It's overwhelming. Only if you have a recipe or some meals to compare does it become simpler to make choices. So we see it really important to present comparison data at the right point to Michael, and then start to see what he takes an interest in. Next slide, please. What that enables you to do is build a picture of what Michael's after. You'll see at the top left there, we've put Michael's name and his identity and his email. Obviously, most people don't log in, and you don't have that kind of thing. But that's the perfect situation if you do. 95% of people will not log in, and you have to understand what they want without the benefit of a CRM or a client profile. And that's where you need to be careful, because if you're treating everyone as an average, then you won't be taking their feedback and altering the process for them. So that was interesting in terms of what you all said in terms of why you go to an offline agent. I think one of the reasons is people feel that they respond to you. An agent listens to you what you want, and even though you know they don't have perfect information, they don't have the same amount of pricing, and they don't have instant pricing necessarily, what they do is they respond to what you're asking for, they interact with you, and somehow they try and produce for you what you've been asking for. If you're treating everyone as an average, then you won't be taking their feedback and altering the process for them. So let's take a look at Michael. In this case, he's just done one session in the pink box there, the summary box. It's one session lasting 27 minutes. He's made 7 availability checks and had 4 issues, some price changes and some non-availability. So his experience isn't brilliant. But as he persists, you can start to pick out what he wants, the DNA of his trip, if you like. Unsurprisingly, the DNA, the yellow bars on the left, show that he's not so interested in family-friendly characteristics. It's just him and his wife. He's more interested in good food and service. So it's incumbent on the website provider to reflect offers which prioritize these things. You wouldn't want to keep showing him family offers if he specifically started to choose through things that really suit him and his wife. And yet, most times you go back to a site, they don't take any of those things into account. And that's where technology can come to the rescue. It's very hard to do this manually, but at least in an offline agent environment, an agent would listen to what Michael wanted and make him proposals. And that is now what you can do with technology. Build the fragments of Michael's comparisons back into a profile and use that to present him with the right offers. Next slide, please. And people like Michael do compare a lot. This data is from one of our clients, and it shows quite how many things they compare. So this is the number of hotels that people look at in a particular session or a couple of sessions. And as you can see, 28% of clients looked at more than 6 hotels, and 13% looked at more than 6 destinations. So even if they came in saying holiday in Crete, if that was the search term they bought, they may well still look at 6 or 7 or 10 different destinations, and it's very unlikely that keyword will end up in a completely perfect result. However, within this search, there are nuggets of information that allow you to see what Michael wants and to understand that, perhaps even before he does. Our buying thesis is such that we think that people evolve their ideas as they see things, and maybe you can recognize what's likely to suit Michael before he does. If the thesis is correct, that he starts to refine his buying as he compares products, then that has some significant implications. Firstly, in the inspiration phase, the goal should be to retain Michael's interest as he searches, ensuring there's a clear set of paths he can follow as his interest evolves. Too often we drive people down decision trees that are based solely, for example, on a destination, and it's based on how we plan our flights, rather than trying to understand what clues Michael is giving us as he searches. Maybe he looks at 8 hotels and discards all those that don't have a swimming pool, and we can infer from that that a swimming pool is important to him. Secondly, it should be really easy to compare products, and there are ways that can be done. Are there ways on your site that you can easily compare products, or is that only done by price? And that is the default sort criteria for most travel products. Sometimes that's the sheer volume of data, but price isn't the sole deciding criteria. In fact, we would suggest the overriding focus on price is one of the reasons people jump from site to site that much. Of course, if an offer is identical in every way, then it makes sense to buy from the cheapest supplier, but travel is complex. And people usually buy when they get a sense of relative value rather than absolute price. And if anyone's really interested in that subject, I'd recommend the books of Daniel Ariely for a quick introduction to that thought process, how to put things in a context which makes it easier for people to make decisions. But if price is the only easy thing to compare, then you'll tend to drive people to do their own price comparison, and they'll go away to other sites to see if they're cheaper than you. What you have to do is bring out the reasons the product that you're selling is better on your site, and you can show that in a way that other people haven't managed to. Next slide, please. So we see it as really important not just to aggregate content from a range of suppliers, but to think through very clearly what data you're presenting and in what manner. Just because you have 20,000 or 100,000 hotels isn't an excuse to avoid curating your content. It's a lot of work, but your client need to have appropriate information to be properly tagged, and Michael needs to have a means to compare them. If not, you'll fall into the trap of aggregating rather than retailing, collecting a raft of offers, throwing them at as many possible clients as you can in the hope that one of them sticks. And maybe that's why so often we get a 1% or a 0.5% conversion rate in travel. But the whole approach offers a poor customer experience. It doesn't build loyalty, and in my experience, it tends to drive down your average selling price. We would advocate setting out a good data strategy, ensuring your products are comparable, make it easy for your clients to compare offers. Maybe even point out the reasons why particular products suit what you'll believe, or more accurately, what probability tells you Michael would be looking for. Next slide, please. And while that sounds complex, it's all possible now. In the Connected Traveller report, one of the recommendations is to choose a technology provider. There are good ones out there who can help you through these things. Companies such as Sabre who are large enough to bring the right elements together. But I'd encourage you to think through what you want before you engage with anyone. If you ask a good company to help you be average, or to treat your clients as segments or numbers, then you risk being stuck in the middle with no advantage. On the other hand, if you play to your strengths, find your niche, and determine to treat clients as individuals, then you'll avoid the trap of being average. And with that, I'd like to hand back to Madhavan and our moderators.
Well, the moderator will step in at this point. Thanks, Andy, and thanks, Madhavan, for the presentations. Thanks also to the audience for the many and varied questions that are coming through. We've still got room for more if anybody's got any burning questions that they'd like to ask the panelists. But one recurring theme coming up in the questions that I'm getting is the prioritization, and to what if, Madhavan, Andy, if you were to give offline agents listening in one key piece of advice that they need to take back in order to improve their online presence, what would that be? Is it to have a better looking website? Is it to specialize in a particular niche? Is it to spend money on imagery, or spend budget on big data? I'm just wondering what do you think would be the best option for offline agents to improve their online presence?
Sure. Martin, if I can take a first stab at that, and Andy, by all means, please feel free to chip in on this. For me, the first starting point, kind of like in line with what Andy mentioned, is to have that data strategy. Data strategy sounds like a big word. What I mean by that is you need to understand your customer set or your customer segment very clearly. The challenge with online, in my opinion, for an offline agency is we are not dealing with personas or standard demographics of customers. There is a whole spectrum of online customer. There is a whole spectrum of niches that you can target. So I think understanding that is the first step, to which you need to gather data and do some analysis as the first step. And based on that, I think there is a sequence of building out based on your understanding of the customer niche that you want to target, through what online channels do you want to reach out to them, and how are you going to maintain seamless consistency across channels. And I think it definitely makes sense to start in small bite-sized chunks, starting off with a website which is also available on a mobile device. As an example, you don't need an app to start with. You can have a mobile web. I think that will be a good start to get on the online journey and build out your capabilities from there.
I fully agree in terms of that's the place to start, is thinking through your capabilities. I would say these things tend to take longer than you want, they're more expensive than you want, but if you don't end up embarking on this process, you will at some stage be left behind. And I think thinking through what you're trying to achieve and why you've got some advantage is a thing you can do that doesn't cost you very much. But if you don't do that, you will really spend far more than you need to.
Okay, so it's the idea of look at the data and know your customers, which is a fairly basic retail premise. One question that's come through in terms of the offline and online blurring is the role of live chat whether that's anything, Madhavan or Andy, you've got any comments or observations on the idea that somebody online can talk to a person without necessarily having to come into a a physical store. I mean, what's the current thinking around live chat, or have we moved on from live chat and now it's all bots, or is there still a role for that live chat function on an agency website?
What I am seeing, Martin, certainly, especially in terms of some of the mature OTAs who are using live chat very efficiently, is that they are able to reduce the calls to their call centers. And they also, I think, the good ones at this understand that social media and especially messaging formats like WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger can be used to service the customer as opposed to trying to sell the customer. And they engage on the service side in terms of responding to customers' question through this channel, and they deflect and reduce the call volumes that their call centers experience. So I think in that sense, chatbots or messenger-based chat interfaces certainly make a difference in terms of improving operational efficiency.
And to add to that, I would say that chat is an extremely cost-effective way of interacting with someone and responding to them. And it responds to what someone's asking, so it's very direct. One of the things that we find very useful is to be able to know who's in the process of wanting to be reacted to, and then we can target chats at the people who are most in need of it, because you can see whether they're high-value clients, whether they're having problems, and so on. What you don't want to do is to be chatting to someone all the time if they are persistently looking for something that either you don't sell or that you can't help them with, and there it's not a very effective process. But chat is generally a more cost-efficient way of approaching people than through the call center. It's cheaper, it's more effective, and you can handle more people at one time. And it's a good way to interact. And that, to me, is the key. Are you interacting and responding to the client needs? In which case, it's generally a good thing.
Okay, great. And then another vehicle or channel that online and offline agents have access to is social media. And I'm just wondering the extent to which that can be used by agents to engage with their clients. Not necessarily Facebook ads or Instagram ads, but just the straightforward Facebook platform. I mean, are there any sort of best practices around that for offline agents to engage with their clients in an online way?
I would say, again, the starting point is what you're trying to achieve. And if you think there are people in your client base who would benefit from interacting with you on that, it's very good. There's some extremely good use of Twitter at the moment, particularly by providers. Not many of the OTAs seem to have got such a good use of Twitter. But I'm increasingly seeing people who are doing very good quotes for services on Twitter, reacting very quickly, and of course that can also be automated. And the more you try these things out and experiment with them, you need to adopt a data-driven approach. Is this working for me or not? And the first question is, what am I trying to achieve? Is it just to build likes, in which case it's not that impressive, but if it's to build a real dialogue with people who you can then pull into your processes, I think there are various social media elements that are extremely good in a mix.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt before Madhavan answers, but Andy, I just wanted to follow up with that. Would you recommend that agents look at using sort of specialist agents to help them out on this, or is this a sort of skill set that they could sort of develop internally rather than outsource?
It all depends on scale, but quite often it's useful to have a helping hand to begin with, because there are lots of very good tools out there and you won't start with the right tools. I think anything you do like this you will invest in. You need to know that you're starting on a process that will take you places you don't necessarily know. Set a limited budget for it, but you will not achieve this without some investment.
Okay, thanks. And Madhavan, what's the Sabre take on the use of social media?
To complement what Andy said, I look at it slightly, I'm looking at it from a slightly different perspective. I think more than thinking about how can I reach out to my customer through social media, which I think is a bit of an easier problem to solve. I think most businesses can figure that out. I think the better way to use social media is to look for global patterns. So through data feeds from Twitter or through data feed from Facebook, you could possibly figure out big events that are happening. And when I say big events, not big global events necessarily, but events within a community. And if you can correlate the knowledge of these events with your marketing and sales campaigns, I think there is something to go after there. And that ties back into building an ability in-house to understand and interpret data. So if you get data feeds from Facebook or Twitter, you need to have the ability to interpret that data and draw conclusions in terms of patterns that are emerging, in terms of what's happening within a particular community and how can you tap into that. Okay, so I think that will be a more interesting, different way of looking at it. Martin, one question I wanted to go back to. I think previously you raised a question from the audience which was about whether more travel is booked online or offline.
Yeah, I think earlier on I was talking about whether there was any sort of research or evidence about how many people that book online have actually been into an online travel agency. We had a few questions from people who were saying, well, the question poll, I would never go into a travel agency. And again, that might be a reflection of the T-News readership, but I'm just wondering if there is any sort of evidence, either sort of, you know, anecdotal or otherwise, around how people multi-shop.
My team got back on that very quickly. So we have, we don't have global or EMEA-wide research on this, but we have data from a particular market, say Germany. And based on that research, what we're seeing is 43% of the consumers booked their travel online, meaning to say more than half still booked it offline. Okay. However, there is evidence that 61% of the people who booked travel looked for information online. So I think that is definitely an interesting data point. I also believe that Focusrite research, Focusrite research is suggesting that for the first time this year, travel is going to make up half of total, well, online travel is going to make up half of total European travel market in the next 2 years.
I mean, that's interesting. If you know, just on the half empty, half full perspective, is that half of travel is still booked offline. So we're getting pretty close towards the end. It's a question that I had a flurry of questions towards the end around segmentation and personalization, and Andy's point that segmentation is, well, I don't think he used the word dangerous, but I will, on his behalf, segmentation is quite dangerous because an individual can have different travel needs for different travel purposes. So Andy, I'm just wondering, what's the best way to approach segmentation? I mean, you've probably only got about a minute to answer that, but if there's one segmentation takeaway that the audience needs, what do you think it is?
One thing, segmenting is better than not segmenting. But actually, I would think in terms of how can you treat customers as an individual, because you will sell more if you engage in a relationship with people. And if someone walked into your shop 10 days in a row, asked you the same questions, and you didn't actually remember them, you'd feel very offended. That's the experience we give most people when they come into an online site. It's always the same. So how can you work out how to deal with that person as an individual? And surprise, surprise, the answer to that will be technology. There are various approaches out there. Do some reading around it. If you want to get in touch with Sabre or ourselves, we can help you think that through. But what can I do to treat someone as an individual? Because if you treat someone as a segment, you're not treating them as an individual. It's better than treating them as an average, but you're still treating them as a group of averages.
Okay, so yeah, that's the answer. Treat everybody as an individual, but segmentation is better than no segmentation. So that's the takeaway. Well, yes, as you can see, we've got the thank you slide, which means we're coming to the end of the session. As it says, if you've got any questions, please send it through to Gene@tnews.com, and a replay of this and the slides will be available on T-News by noon tomorrow-ish, and any attendees will also get a thank you email from GoToWebinar with links through to the content on tnews.com, we hope. So again, thanks very much for listening. My name's Martin Cowan. I'm contributing editor. This has been my first webinar moderating issue, so thanks for being gentle with me. And sure, see you all again soon, I hope. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Martin. Thanks.
Okay.